Welcome, everyone. Have you ever read an ancient text and just felt like you were only getting half the story? Like there was some inside joke or a massive cultural reference you were just totally missing? Well, today we're going to fix exactly that. We're unpacking this absolutely phenomenal concept developed by Vernon K. Robbins. It's called intertext. Think of it as our ultimate detective toolkit for the day, a way to uncover the hidden dimensions of the New Testament. Okay, let's dive into this explainer and see what we can find.
Here's the roadmap for our explainer today. First up, inner versus intertexture. Second, we'll look at why intertexture was developed. Third, we'll break down the four major components. Fourth, we'll see it all come together in Acts 2, a convergence. And finally, reading the wider world.
Let's kick things off with part 1, inner versus intertexture.
So, intertexture is all about what happens strictly within the text itself. The words, the grammar, the literary structure. It's kind of like trying to solve a mystery by looking exclusively inside a locked room. But intertexture, that's about opening the front door, stepping outside, and investigating how the text interacts with realities outside itself. It's literally exploring the whole neighborhood.
Vernon K. Robbins actually defines this as a text's representation of, reference to, and use of phenomena in the world outside the text being interpreted. Wow, okay, let's break that down into plain English for a second. He's basically saying that a biblical text is never completely isolated. It doesn't live on an island. It is always communicating with the world way beyond its own margins.
And when you really grasp this, it dramatically shifts your mindset as a reader. We transition from just being passive consumers of a text to acting as textual detectives. We actually stop merely asking, what does this passage say? And we start asking a completely different set of questions.
Let's move to and see how this builds an entirely new framework. We go out into the wider world by asking 4 new investigative questions. What earlier texts does it use? What historical events does it assume? What social institutions explain it? And what cultural customs illuminate it?
Moving right along to part 2, why intertexture was developed.
Here is the absolutely crucial point we need to remember. Texts do not exist in a vacuum. Robbins recognized early on that if we ignore external realities, we risk totally misinterpreting the biblical text. We actually need the outside world to accurately decode the inside message.
Think of it this way. Every New Testament passage interacts with a massive web of outside factors. We're talking about earlier scriptures, deeply held Jewish traditions, the broader Greco-Roman society, major historical events, cultural customs, political systems, and varied religious beliefs. These aren't just abstract, lofty ideas. No, these are the tangible, concrete pieces of the ancient world that actively influenced and illuminated the meaning of the text for its original audience.
All right, let's dive into part 3, the 4 major components.
So to make sense of all those interacting pieces we just mentioned, Robbins essentially created 4 distinct magnifying glasses. Component number 1 is oral scribal intertexture. This focuses entirely on how a biblical author weaves earlier oral or written traditions right into their new messages. This can include direct quotations, really subtle allusions, echoes, or even completely recontextualizing an older story.
And this brilliantly illustrates the point. Look at Matthew chapter 1. The author directly quotes the Old Testament prophet Isaiah, "Behold, the virgin shall conceive." By doing this, Matthew pulls an ancient Old Testament prophecy into a brand new Christological context. He's fundamentally linking Jesus to the historic Jewish scriptures. It's a real game changer for the original readers.
Okay, component number 2 is historical intertexture. This is where the text anchors itself in verifiable, real-world timelines. It examines how the author refers to real historical people, actual places, and specific, datable circumstances.
A perfect example of this is the beginning of Luke chapter 2. When Luke tells the story of Jesus' birth, he doesn't just say, once upon a time. He anchors the narrative directly to documented Roman history. He specifically mentions the Emperor Caesar Augustus and the governor Quirinius, which essentially cross-references his gospel with Rome's own tax records. How cool is that?
Moving right along to component number 3, social intertexture. This category looks at how the text reflects the broader social structures and institutions of its time. We're talking about the societal rules, the hierarchies, economic systems, and family dynamics that the original audience lived under every single day.
Take the Book of Philemon, for instance. You literally cannot understand the incredible tension in this short letter without understanding the Roman institution of slavery and the patron-client system. Paul's appeal regarding Onesimus relies entirely on the audience knowing exactly how these rigid social structures operated back in the first century.
And that brings us to the fourth and final component, cultural intertexture. This examines how invisible cultural norms, things like honor and shame, purity laws, festivals, or even hospitality, how those shape the actions and reactions of characters within the text.
Just look at John 13, that famous scene where Jesus washes the disciples' feet. If you just read the words on the page, sure, it's a nice gesture. But knowing the cultural intertexture changes absolutely everything. In first-century hospitality customs, washing feet was strictly the job of the lowest servant. Knowing this perfectly explains why Peter is so deeply shocked and initially objects to Jesus doing it. That cultural context provides the whole emotional weight of the scene.
Now for the really fun part, Section 4, Acts 2, a convergence.
Now, what's really interesting to see here is how this breakdown summarizes the sheer complexity of Pentecost. Acts 2 is basically a masterclass where all four forms of intertexture crash together at once. Just look at how they layer. First, oral scribal. Peter anchors his speech by quoting Joel 2 and Psalm 16. Second, historical. The whole thing takes place during the very real, verifiable Pentecost festival in first-century Jerusalem. Third, social. You have a massive gathering of pilgrims from many nations experiencing public speech and communal response. And finally, cultural. The entire event is completely saturated in the customs of a Jewish pilgrimage, covenant expectations, and deep messianic hope. Robbins' framework absolutely unlocks the full, multidimensional depth of this event.
Let's wrap things up with Part 5, Reading the Wider World. So what does this all mean? Why does this methodology ultimately matter for us? It matters because the New Testament is a living document. It was written within a living, historical, social, and cultural context. Reading it in isolation, just ignoring the wider world, simply robs the text of its depth and power. True meaning emerges from the active interaction between the written words on the page and the wider, vibrant world they evoke.
And that brings us to our final thought. We've talked a lot today about the ancient world's intertexture, but here is a question to leave you pondering. How do your own modern cultural and social lenses shape the way you read these ancient texts today? Because just as the ancient authors brought their world to the text, we bring ours as well. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer to explore the fascinating world of intertexture. Keep reading, keep investigating, and I'll catch you next time.